The wind howled, the door slammed, and a small body hit the frozen porch with a thud. Bare feet scraped across splintered wood, her trembling hands reaching for warmth that never came. Inside, a man's cruel laughter echoed, a dog's bowl clattered, and hunger twisted her stomach like a knife. She whispered to the night, "Mama, I'm so cold." But no answer came. Only silence, only snow. Then headlights cut through the storm. Tires screeched. A man stepped out, his eyes locking on the shivering child. 1 second of hesitation, one choice, and nothing would ever be the same again. If you want to know what happens next, stay with me until the end of the video. And if you still believe deep in your heart that God is always watching over you silently, arranging everything then right now, leave a comment saying Amen below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write those words, a blessing may quietly enter your life. On a bitter winter night in Duluth, Minnesota, the wind came roaring off Lake Superior like a living thing, shrieking down narrow streets and rattling the loose shingles of old houses. Snow swirled in heavy sheets, stinging the skin and blanketing the sidewalks in a thick white crust. Most families had drawn their curtains tight against the storm, the glow of warm lamps softening the darkness outside. But on the sagging porch of one wooden house, a small figure huddled against the doorframe, her body curled like a discarded rag doll. 6-year-old Emily Carter wore only a threadbare cardigan with holes at the elbows, her bare feet pressed against boards rimed with frost. Her lips were purple, her lashes stiff with ice. She wrapped her arms around her knees, whispering faint prayers into the whistling night. Inside, Ronald Miller clutched a half-empty bottle of whiskey, his movements clumsy and mean. He shoved aside a cabinet door, letting it slam against the wall, and scooped a ladle of greasy broth into a dented dog bowl. His voice slurred with drink and rage. "Eat, girl. That's what you get. No better than the mutt." In the corner, the pit bull whimpered, ribs showing beneath patchy fur. Emily's stomach twisted with hunger, but she shook her head faintly, her words almost lost beneath the howl of the storm. "Please, not like that." Her refusal only deepened Ron's fury. He seized her thin arm, dragging her to the porch, and with a violent shove sent her sprawling into the snow. The door slammed shut behind her, the lock turning with a click that felt like a sentence. Emily curled against the mat, tears freezing on her cheeks. She pressed her palms together, her voice a brittle whisper. "Mama, can you hear me in heaven? I'm so cold." The storm swallowed her plea, leaving her small frame shivering, barely able to draw breath. It might have ended there. Another forgotten tragedy, hidden beneath winter's cruelty, had headlights not appeared through the curtain of snow. A black SUV slowed at the curb, its wipers pushing back heavy flakes. Behind the wheel sat Jonathan Blake, a man whose world usually revolved around boardrooms and towering glass offices. But tonight his eyes locked on the child curled against the door. "My God," he murmured, cutting the engine. He stepped out into the storm, the cold biting instantly through his tailored coat. The sight before him struck deep. This was no accident, no child waiting for a late ride home. This was abandonment. He crouched low, his breath steaming in the frozen air. "Hey," he said softly, pulling the wool coat from his shoulders and wrapping it around the frail girl. The fabric nearly swallowed her, but her small hands clutched it desperately, as if it were the last lifeline she would ever hold. Jonathan's voice steadied, low and reassuring. "You're safe now. Can you tell me your name?" Emily's eyes flickered open, glazed with exhaustion and fear. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Then the door burst open, and Ronald Miller filled the frame, his shadow looming across the snow. The bottle dangled from his hand, his voice thick with menace. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Jonathan straightened slowly, the storm whipping around them. A silent battle had begun, cruelty on one side, compassion on the other, and the winter night held its breath. Jonathan did not move when Ronald Miller appeared in the doorway, his bulky frame filling the light. The whiskey bottle swung from his hand as he staggered forward, voice heavy with rage. "She's mine. You don't just take her." Jonathan kept his tone calm. "She's freezing. She needs help." Ron snarled, jabbing the bottle toward him. "She eats what I give her, sleeps where I tell her. You got no right." Jonathan looked down at the child clinging to his coat. Her lips were blue, her breath shallow. There was no time to argue. He lifted her higher and strode toward his SUV. Ron's curses rang behind him. "That's kidnapping." But Jonathan didn't stop. Inside the warm car, the girl whispered, "Please, don't take me back." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I won't." The SUV sped through the storm wheels, crunching over ice until the red glow of Duluth General Hospital broke through the snow. Jonathan leapt out, carrying her inside. "Somebody help!" he shouted. Dr. Karen Mitchell, head of pediatrics, rushed forward. In seconds, Emily was surrounded by nurses. Dr. Mitchell pressed a stethoscope to her chest, frowned at the raw welts around her wrists, and muttered, "Severe hypothermia. Malnourished. Possible chronic abuse." She shot Jonathan a sharp look. "What happened?" Her stepfather Jonathan managed. Dr. Mitchell's jaw hardened. "You did right bringing her here. We'll notify Child Protective Services." On the gurney, Emily stirred faintly, her voice almost lost. "Do daddies always leave?" Jonathan bent close. "Not all of them." For the first time, hope flickered in her eyes. Hours later, Emily lay under warm blankets in the pediatric ward. A volunteer placed broth bread and a stuffed rabbit beside her. Emily reached for the bread, but tried to hide it under her pillow. Jonathan crouched beside her. "You don't need to hide food," he said softly. "Tomorrow, there'll still be more." She hesitated, then took a small bite openly. A faint smile touched her lips, and Jonathan felt his chest tighten. The moment shattered when the ward doors banged open. Ronald stormed in his lawyer, Mark Ellison, at his side. Reporters trailed behind cameras, flashing. "That man stole my daughter," Ron bellowed. Emily shrank into her blankets, clutching the rabbit. Jonathan rose to his full height. She was left outside into the snow. Mark raised the custody papers high. "This billionaire is exploiting a child for publicity. My client is her legal guardian." Reporters shoved microphones forward. "Mr. Hegg, Blake, did you abduct this girl?" "Is this a stunt?" Jonathan kept his composure, though fury burned inside him. He bent low to Emily, speaking so only she could hear. "I'm not leaving you, no matter what they say." Dr. Mitchell stepped between them, her voice sharp. "This is a hospital, not a circus. Leave now, or I'll have security remove you." Ron spat back. "She'll eat what I give her, sleep where I tell her." Dr. Mitchell's eyes blazed. "What I see is hypothermia, malnutrition, and restraint marks. That speaks louder than your claims." Security pushed the reporters away, but Emily clung tighter to Jonathan's sleeve, trembling. The battle had just begun. That night, the hospital fell quiet under the hum of machines. Jonathan sat by Emily's bed, ignoring the buzz of his phone calls from his company, texts from his board. None of it mattered. Near midnight, Emily woke, screaming, thrashing under the blankets. "Don't put me outside. I'll eat it. I'll eat the dog's food." Nurses hurried in, but Jonathan knelt quickly, wrapping her in another blanket. "Emily, listen to me. You're not outside. You're safe. I won't let anyone put you out there again." Her sobs slowed. She searched his face, desperate to know if his words were lies. At last she collapsed against his chest, still trembling but clinging tight. The nurse whispered softly, "She trusts you." Jonathan held her until dawn. His back ached, but he never moved. When pale light crept through the blinds, he whispered into her hair, "You'll never beg in the snow again. Not while I breathe." Emily stirred her lips, brushing his coat, as she murmured one fragile word. "Dad." Jonathan closed his eyes, tears burning, and held her closer. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The word was a vow he would spend the rest of his life honouring. The storm outside had eased, but inside Duluth General the air was heavy with unease. By morning the hospital corridors buzzed with whispers. Nurses exchanged worried glances, administrators fielded calls from reporters, and Child Protective Services had already dispatched a caseworker. Jonathan Blake sat in the waiting room with his lawyer David Lawson, a calm, steady presence, with greying hair and sharp eyes. Jonathan's shoulders were tight, his voice low. "They were already painting me as a kidnapper." David tapped the folder in his lap. "Ronald Miller has a lawyer who knows how to spin a story. Mark Ellison will feed the press before we even step into court. But we don't fight with noise. We fight with evidence." Jonathan leaned back, rubbing his temples. "She called me Dad last night." The words came out rough, as if he barely believed them. "I can't let him drag her back." David's tone softened. "Then we start building. Every detail counts." The preliminary custody hearing was set for 3 days later. By then, headlines screamed across Minnesota: "Billionaire abducts child from stepdad's home." Talk shows buzzed with speculation, and an edited clip showing Jonathan lifting Emily from the porch had gone viral. The video had no context, only the image of a wealthy man carrying a child away in the night. The courthouse steps were swarmed with cameras when Jonathan arrived with David. Inside the gallery was packed reporters scribbling notes. Judge Margaret O'Connor, a woman known for her stern fairness, called the room to order. On one side sat Ronald Miller, scrubbed up in a wrinkled suit, eyes bloodshot but wearing an almost pitiful expression. Beside him, Mark Ellison laid out glossy custody papers. On the other, Jonathan sat straight-backed, David Lawson steady at his side. Ellison began with his performance. "Your Honour, this is simple. Mr. Miller is the lawful guardian. This child has lived under his roof since her mother's death. My opponent, wealthy, powerful, swooped in during a storm and exploited the situation for attention. He is parading a vulnerable child for his reputation." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Ronald nodded solemnly, trying to mimic dignity. Judge O'Connor turned her gaze to David. "Mr. Lawson." David rose, voice calm, deliberate. "Your Honour, Emily Carter was admitted to Duluth General with severe hypothermia, malnutrition, and wrist abrasions consistent with restraint. Medical tests found canine food residue in her stomach." He handed forward the reports. "This is not a matter of guardianship paperwork. This is a matter of survival." A hush fell over the courtroom. Jonathan forced himself not to look at Ronald, though fury simmered beneath his composure. David pressed on. "We also have preliminary statements. A neighbour, Linda Perez, heard Mr. Miller screaming at the child, calling her worthless, telling her to eat from the dog's bowl. A kennel owner, Frank Dugan, will testify that Mr. Miller purchased bulk dog chow regularly, claiming it was cheaper than feeding 2 mouths. And a 9-year-old boy, Ethan Ross, saw Emily left outside during snowstorms. Ronald slammed his hand on the table. Lies. She's weak. She cries over nothing. Kids need tough love. The gallery gasped. Judge O'Connor's gavel cracked like thunder. Enough, Mr. Miller, sit down. Ron sank back, scowling, but the damage was done. His mask of pitiful dignity had slipped. After hours of testimony, Judge O'Connor leaned back, expression unreadable. This case is contested. Until a full investigation is complete, the child cannot remain with either party. Temporary custody will be assigned to an independent guardian, George Whitaker, a retired civil servant with long experience in child welfare. Jonathan's heart sank. Across the room, Emily sat with a caseworker, her small frame dwarfed by the chair. When she heard the ruling, her lip trembled. As the caseworker led her out, her voice cracked through the silence. "Will you come back for me?" Jonathan stood quickly, his voice steady and strong. No matter what, Judge O'Connor's gavel struck again for silence, but the words echoed through the chamber like a vow. Whitaker's home stood on a quiet street. The old man welcomed Emily with warm eyes, a sweater hanging loose on his frame. "Come in, child. No one sleeps outside here." Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon toast and wood polish. He showed her a small bedroom with a yellow quilt and a moon-shaped lamp. On the nightstand sat a wicker basket labelled "Always Food." Inside were crackers, a banana, and a carton of milk. "This is yours," Whitaker explained. "If you're hungry, you don't have to ask. It will always be filled again." Emily's throat tightened. She took a cracker, slipped it under her pillow, and lay down. Minutes later, she peeked again. The basket was still full. Her breathing eased for the first time. Whitaker whispered to the caseworker in the hall, "She'll test me for weeks." That's how children learn if a home is real. Meanwhile, Ronald seethed in a dingy bar. Mark Ellison slid his phone across the table, a shaky video playing Jonathan carrying Emily into the SUV. Out of context, it looked damning. "This is all we need," Mark said coldly. "One clip. The internet will do the rest." Ron's cruel laugh shook the glass in his hand. "Kidnap a billionaire. People will eat it up." By morning, hashtags were trending. Jonathan's company faced pressure. Investors, panicked sponsors pulled away. At his penthouse, Jonathan sat with David Lawson, surrounded by piles of evidence. David tapped the papers like a general at war. "We build a chain of proof so strong no smear can break it. Receipts, witnesses, medical labs, timestamps." And this, he held up a crayon drawing Emily had made in the hospital, a crooked house with snow falling, an X over the door, and the words, "Outside means bad." Jonathan stared at it, throat tight. "That drawing says more than any headline." David nodded. "And it will speak in court louder than Ellison's lies." Late one night, Jonathan drove past Ronald's house. He shouldn't have, but something gnawed at him. In the backyard, chained to a post, the pit bull whined weakly, ribs sharp beneath mangy fur. Its water bowl was frozen solid. Jonathan crouched, extending his hand. The dog crept forward, tail wagging once, tongue rasping across his fingers. Trust despite neglect. Jonathan swallowed hard, remembering Emily curled barefoot in the snow. He dialed animal control, his voice clipped. "There's neglect. Send someone now." When the chain was removed and the dog lifted into the van, Jonathan whispered, You're safe now. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to the animal or to himself. The tide was shifting, but Jonathan knew the real war, the one for Emily's future, was only just beginning. The second custody hearing drew even more attention than the first. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, their microphones and cameras bristling like weapons. Inside every bench was filled the air charged with expectation. Ronald Miller entered in a pressed suit hair slicked back, the smell of liquor faint but lingering. His lawyer, Mark Ellison, carried a neat stack of papers, his smirk suggesting victory already in hand. Jonathan Blake followed with David Lawson, keeping his gaze forward, jaw tight. Judge Margaret O'Connor entered briskly, calling the court to order. This matter concerns the welfare of minor Emily Carter. Both parties will be heard. Mark Ellison wasted no time. He painted Jonathan as a manipulative billionaire desperate for good press. He waved custody documents high for the gallery to see. Mr. Miller provided her with a roof and food. Mr. Blake stole her in the middle of the night to parade his heroics. Ronald nodded solemnly, feigning hurt dignity. She's my responsibility. I may be rough, but I do what's best. David Lawson rose calmly, sliding exhibits forward. Your Honour, the medical reports confirm hypothermia, malnutrition, and canine food residue in Emily's stomach. That is not parenting. That is cruelty. He called the first witness Linda Perez. Linda twisted her hands nervously. I heard him yelling at her, calling her worthless, telling her to eat from the dog's bowl. I should have spoken sooner. Next came Frank Dugan, the kennel owner. His voice carried a growl. Miller bought bulk dog chow every week. Said it was cheaper than feeding 2 mouths. His pit bull was half-starved too. That food wasn't for the animal, it was for the girl. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Finally, Ethan Ross, only 9, stepped nervously to the stand. His small voice wavered, but held steady. I saw her outside one night. It was snowing. She cried until she couldn't anymore. I didn't tell anyone because I was scared. But I can't forget. The gallery fell silent. Judge O'Connor studied Ronald. Sweat gathered at his temple. Then his mask cracked. He slammed the table. She's weak. She needed tough love. The words struck the room like a blow. Parents in the gallery gasped, and Judge O'Connor's gavel thundered. Enough. This court will not tolerate cruelty disguised as discipline. She ordered a recess. In chambers, only a few were present. Judge O'Connor, David Ellison, Ronald Jonathan, a social worker, and Emily herself. Emily sat in a chair too large for her, the stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. Her feet swung nervously above the floor. Judge O'Connor leaned forward, her voice gentler now. Emily, we only want to understand. Can you tell us what life was like at home? Emily's eyes flickered to Ronald. His glare was sharp warning. She shrank back silent. Jonathan shifted just enough for her to see him. He didn't speak, only nodded once, his gaze steady and kind. Emily took a shaky breath. With trembling fingers, she pulled a crayon drawing from her pocket and placed it on the table. It showed a crooked house, snow falling an X across the door, and a small stick figure curled outside. In shaky letters she had written, "Outside means I was bad." Her voice was barely more than a whisper. He made me stay outside. All night, sometimes. Said the dog's food was mine if I was hungry. She hugged the rabbit tighter. I just wanted to be inside. Mark Ellison tried to object, but Judge O'Connor silenced him with a glare. Children do not invent pain, this specific, she said coldly. Ronald lunged forward. She's lying. The judge's eyes narrowed. Sit down, Mr. Miller, or you will be removed. Emily's shoulders sagged with relief, though fear lingered in her eyes. Jonathan wanted to cross the room and take her hand, but he knew this strength was hers alone. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was different. The gallery leaned forward, pens scratching furiously. Judge O'Connor's voice cut through the tension. This court has reviewed testimony, medical evidence, and the words of the minor herself. Mr. Miller, your behavior demonstrates cruelty, not care. Until criminal charges are resolved, you are prohibited from all contact. Ronald shot to his feet, face red. You can't do this. She's mine. Sit down, or you'll be held in contempt. The gavel cracked like thunder. The judge turned to Jonathan. Mr. Blake, you acted to protect this child. The court grants you interim guardianship, supervised by Child Protective Services, and ongoing therapy for Emily Carter. This arrangement will continue until final custody is determined. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Emily lifted her head, eyes wide. For the first time, hope flickered across her tear-streaked face. Ronald erupted, lunging toward the table, shouting curses. Bailiffs restrained him, dragging him from the room as he kicked and raged. Jonathan crossed the aisle quickly, kneeling in front of Emily. His voice was soft but firm. You're coming home with me now. Inside, always. Her small hand reached for his coat, gripping tightly, as if afraid he might vanish. And for the first time, Emily smiled. The first night in Jonathan Blake's penthouse felt like stepping into another world. The elevator doors opened to marble floors and tall windows that overlooked Lake Superior, the city lights glittering below. For Emily Carter, it was overwhelming. She clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly, her eyes darting everywhere as if expecting the walls to vanish at any moment. Jonathan knelt so he could meet her gaze. It's big, I know, he said gently, but it isn't empty anymore. Come, I'll show you. Down the hall, he opened the door to a lavender-painted bedroom. A quilt lay neatly on the bed, and beside it sat a familiar moon-shaped lamp, the same kind she had used at George Whitaker's home. On the dresser was a clear container labelled comfort drawer. Inside were crackers, juice, and dried fruit. Emily froze, staring at it. Slowly, she shuffled forward, lifted the lid, and peeked inside. She touched a cracker, then slipped it carefully under her pillow. Minutes later, she checked again. Nothing was missing. Her lips parted in a small whisper. It stayed. Jonathan's heart ached at the relief in her voice. It'll always stay, he said softly. Over the next days, he built little rituals for her quiet promises that life here was different. At breakfast, he showed her a row of pantry shelves stocked with cereal and pasta. This shelf is yours, he explained. It won't run out. At night, they practiced door safety. He placed boots by the front door and reminded her gently. No one steps outside without shoes and a coat. Ever. Emily's wide eyes studied him carefully before she nodded. Therapy sessions with Mrs. Joanne Fields. The school counsellor introduced Emily to the feelings thermometer. She pointed to blue for sadness, red for fear, and once hesitantly, yellow for hope. Jonathan sat beside her through every session, never correcting, never rushing. In the kitchen, he pulled a sturdy stool to the counter and let her stir a pot of soup. She giggled when broth splashed onto her sleeve. The sound startled them both. Her first laugh in weeks. Jonathan felt his chest tighten with something unfamiliar, joy mixed with grief for all she had endured. At bedtime, she often tested him. She would pad down the hallway and tug lightly at his sleeve while he sat reading. Hungry, she whispered. He always rose without hesitation, opened the comfort drawer with her and shared a cracker at the table. No scolding, no shame, only presence. One night she climbed into his lap as he sat by the window. Snow drifted across the city, the glow of street lamps hazy in the storm. Emily pressed her cheek to his chest. "Inside feels warm," she murmured. Jonathan wrapped a blanket around them both, letting silence answer. For a man who once measured life in contracts and profit, these rituals felt more binding than any deal he had ever made. Meanwhile, the smear campaign against him was beginning to unravel. Mark Ellison's viral video had dominated headlines, but David Lawson worked tirelessly, filing defamation suits and supplying ironclad evidence. Veterinary records proved Ronald's pit bull was malnourished. Receipts from Frank Dugan showed bulk dog food purchases. Linda Perez's sworn testimony detailed nights of shouting and insults. And then came the recording from Cheryl Adams, the bartender. On the tape, Ronald's voice slurred with drunken glee, "Kidnap a billionaire. People will eat it up." Mark's colder tone followed one clip. "The internet will do the rest." The recording spread like wildfire. Within days, the very outlets that smeared Jonathan printed retractions in bold type: "Correction. Evidence points to abuse by stepfather." Public opinion swung sharply. "Feeding a child dog food isn't parenting." One commenter wrote, "It's cruelty." Another, "Blake saved her." Period. Jonathan read a few comments, then shut the laptop. No headline could erase the memory of Emily barefoot in the snow, but at least the world was beginning to see the truth. Still, the nights were not easy. Emily woke often from nightmares, her small voice pleading, "Don't put me outside. I'll eat it, please." Jonathan would wrap her in blankets, whispering until her trembling eased. Each time she finally drifted back to sleep, he remained beside her, unwilling to let go. One Saturday, their building hosted a winter festival in the courtyard. Neighbours gathered around tables lined with food and crafts. Emily held Jonathan's hand tightly, nervous, but curious. At the art booth, she chose crayons and began to draw. When she finished, she pressed the paper to her chest before showing him. The picture was simple, a house with snow falling outside, but this time a glowing yellow window shone within. Two stick figures stood inside, hand in hand. Across the roof, she had written carefully, "My family." Jonathan swallowed hard. She tugged his sleeve, whispering, "Will you hang it up at home front and centre?" he promised. That night, the drawing went on the wall opposite the dining table. Emily stared at it a long time before whispering, "It feels real." As the days passed, Emily's voice grew steadier. She laughed more often, asked quiet questions, even began to hum when she played with her rabbit. But Jonathan knew the battle wasn't finished. The final custody hearing loomed, and Ronald still faced criminal charges. Late one evening, Emily sat on her lavender bed, the quilt tucked beneath her chin, the moon lamp glowing softly. She hesitated, then turned toward Jonathan. "If I call you something," she whispered, "will the door stay unlocked?" Jonathan crouched beside her. "Forever." She swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. "Dad." The word trembled in the air, fragile but fierce. Jonathan blinked back tears, resting his hand over hers. "I heard you," he whispered. "Every word." Emily smiled faintly, clutching the rabbit close as her eyelids fluttered shut. For the first time, her breathing slipped into deep, peaceful sleep. Jonathan lingered in the doorway, watching her chest rise and fall. On the wall, the crayon drawing glowed under the lamp's light. 2 figures inside a house, safe from the snow. For the first time, Jonathan realized he wasn't only giving her shelter. She had given him something too, belonging purpose, the meaning of the word dad. The criminal courtroom was quiet but heavy with tension. Ronald Miller shuffled in wearing county blues, his wrists in chains. The swagger he once wore was gone, replaced with a sour glare. Mark Ellison sat beside him, stiff and pale, already ruined by the exposure of his forged documents and shady deals. Judge Margaret O'Connor wasted no time. The prosecution presented photos of Emily's injuries, medical reports proving malnutrition and canine food in her stomach, testimony from neighbours, and the animal control report of the starving pit bull. The final blow was the bartender's recording Ronald boasting about smearing Jonathan Blake with a viral video. Piece by piece, Ronald's cruelty was laid bare. When he exploded shouting, "She's weak," she cried over nothing. "Kids need tough love," the gallery gasped. Judge O'Connor's gavel cracked. "This is not discipline. This is abuse." Her ruling was swift: 10 years in prison, barred from all contact with Emily, plus 2 more years for animal neglect. Ellison would face suspension of his law license. Ronald was dragged from the courtroom cursing, but Emily never looked at him. Her eyes were only on Jonathan. He crossed the room, knelt, and she slipped her small hand into his without fear. That night, snow fell gently over Duluth. In Jonathan's penthouse, warmth filled the air. Emily's lavender room glowed under the moon lamp. Her comfort drawer stocked her quilt tucked snug around her. After dinner, she pointed at her crayon drawing on the wall, the house with the glowing yellow window. "That's us," she whispered. Jonathan's voice caught. "Yes, that's us." At bedtime, Emily held her stuffed rabbit close. "If I call you Dad again," she asked softly, "will the door stay unlocked forever?" Jonathan brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Forever," he promised. Her lips curved into a smile. "Good night, Dad." This time the word carried no fear, only trust. Jonathan lingered at the doorway, tears in his eyes, as Emily drifted into her first peaceful sleep inside a safe home. The storm outside was over. Inside at last there was light. Today's story comes to an end, but its echo still lingers in the heart. What do you think? Give us a score from 1 to 10 and feel free to share a few words in the comments. Every voice here is valued and heard. Before you go, let me ask you gently, are you doing okay today? If your heart feels heavy, let this place be a quiet corner where you can share and find comfort. See you again in the next bedtime story, where love and hope remind us that no matter how dark the night may seem, kindness will always prevail.